"That's no tattoo," the weathered woman declared. "It's a slave mark from the trading block." The rancher's tears fell like rain. For 4 days running, Eli Thompson had found himself staring at the mark etched into her arm. Each time Ayanna pushed back her sleeves to work, there it sat, a precise circle containing mysterious symbols, seared deep into her flesh just above her wrist. Initially, it appeared ornamental, resembling the traditional markings he'd observed on other Apache women. Yet something about this particular mark felt off. Sinister. The way she hastily concealed it when she noticed his gaze. How her whole frame stiffened whenever he approached that side. How she prevented water from touching it directly during her washing at the pump. On the fifth dawn, as she reached for a weighty pail, her sleeve slipped back once more. This time, Eli witnessed something that turned his blood to ice. The mark's borders weren't the crisp lines of customary Apache artistry. They were jagged, scarred, and at the base, nearly invisible unless one searched specifically, were minute numerals. "Ayanna," he spoke softly, his tone foreign to his own hearing. "That marking on your arm." She froze completely, her spine still toward him, pail suspended midway to her mouth. "What exactly is it?" The quiet hung between them like a stretched wire ready to break. When she finally pivoted, her gaze held something he'd never witnessed before. Not rage, not terror, something deeper, something that had been entombed for years. "You believe it's ornamental?" she said, her voice barely audible. "You believe my people selected this?" Eli nodded slowly, bewildered by the sudden change in her manner. "It's not a tattoo, Mr. Thompson." She placed the pail down with measured precision. "It's a brand from the slave market." The words lingered in the atmosphere like smoke from a dying ember. Eli felt his reality shift sideways as comprehension struck him. Brand. Slave market. The type of market where humans were sold like livestock, marked like animals, numbered for record keeping. But that seemed impossible. This was Apache land. These were free territories. There were no markets here. No one would dare. "What market?" he breathed. Ayanna's eyes filled with what might have been tears, but her voice stayed firm as iron. "The one your settlement conducts every new moon, Mr. Thompson. The one you've been riding past for 2 years without ever questioning what those enclosures behind the trading post truly serve." And that's when Eli Thompson realized he didn't understand his own community at all. The coffee mug tumbled from Eli's grasp and exploded against the wooden deck. Dark liquid spread across the aged planks like spilled blood, but he couldn't pull his stare from Ayanna's expression. Her words reverberated in his mind. "The one-year settlement conducts every new moon." "That's impossible," he whispered. But even as he uttered it, fragments of recollection began assembling. The monthly journeys to town he avoided. How discussion ceased when he entered Peterson's trading post on particular days. The peculiar wagons that rolled through after dark, their canvas tops concealing whatever freight lay within. Ayanna gathered the shattered pottery with deliberate hands. Her movements were exact and measured. "You never questioned why I recoiled when you mentioned visiting town during the new moon? Why always discovered extra tasks to keep me here on those evenings?" Eli's throat felt like sandpaper. He recalled last month when he'd proposed they both ride into town for provisions. How her face had drained of color. How she'd insisted the horses required attention. He'd assumed she simply preferred the ranch's isolation. "The enclosures," he said slowly, "behind Peterson's store. I always assumed they were for livestock shipments." A harsh laugh escaped her lips. They are for livestock, Mr. Thompson. Just not the type you envisioned. The morning sun felt harsher now, throwing long shadows across the ranch. Eli watched as Ayanna walked to the pump, her gait steady despite the tremor he could detect in her hands. The brand on her arm seemed to burn darker in the sunlight. Those tiny numbers at the bottom suddenly made horrifying sense. How long, he asked. How long has this been occurring? 8 years. She drew water from the pump with mechanical precision. Every month, like clockwork, they transport wagons from 3 territories. Sometimes Apache, sometimes Mexican families from the border settlements, sometimes children who strayed too far from their homes. Eli felt nauseated. 8 years. He'd been living 20 miles from a slave auction for 8 years, riding past those enclosures dozens of times, never questioning the sounds that emerged from behind Peterson's store, never asking why certain folks in town seemed to possess wealth that didn't match their supposed occupations. Who operates it? His voice emerged strained. Ayanna paused, the bucket halfway to her lips. When she met his gaze, he saw something that chilled him more than her previous words. Recognition, the kind that comes with intimate knowledge of evil. You know them, she said quietly. You drink with them, you trade with them, you call them neighbors. The world tilted under Eli's feet. Everything he thought he understood about his community, his town, his existence crumbled like autumn leaves. But one question burned brighter than his shock and shame. How did you get away? Ayanna's eyes hardened. Who says I got away, Mr. Thompson? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Eli stared at Ayanna, her words echoing in his mind. Who says I got away? The implication hit him like a physical blow. And suddenly he understood why she'd appeared at his ranch 20 months ago. Why she'd worked for barely enough food to survive, why she never requested wages. I was bought, she said, reading the horror in his expression, by a man who needed a housekeeper. When he died of consumption last winter, his widow had no use for me. She sent me here with a letter. Eli's blood turned to ice. What letter? Ayanna reached into her worn dress pocket and extracted a folded paper, yellowed with age and handling. She handed it to him with steady fingers, though he could see the muscle in her jaw tighten. The handwriting was familiar, too familiar. Dear Eli, he read aloud, his voice cracking. The bearer of this letter is clean, hard-working, and obedient. She can cook, clean, and handle livestock. I trust you'll find her services adequate until you can make other arrangements. She requires little food and no wages. Consider this a favor between neighbors. Margaret Winters. The letter fluttered from his hands like a dead bird. Margaret Winters, the banker's widow, the woman who'd served him coffee at church socials, who'd inquired about his health with apparent concern, who'd smiled sweetly when she handed him this letter and told him she was helping him find reliable help. She knew, he whispered. Mrs. Winters knew what you were, Ayanna corrected. She was there, at the auction. She bid on a young Mexican girl for her kitchen, but someone offered more. I went to old Mr. Carver instead. Eli felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. The respected members of his community, people he'd known for years, people he trusted, they were all part of this. The auction wasn't some hidden operation run by outlaws and drifters. It was a business supported by the very people who sang hymns on Sunday mornings. How many know, he asked. Most of the town council, the store owners, anyone with money to spend and work that needs doing. Ayanna's voice remained level, but he could see the pain etched in the lines around her eyes. They call it an apprenticeship program. Makes it sound respectable. A horse's hooves thundered up the dirt road toward the ranch. Eli looked up to see a familiar figure approaching, Sheriff Watson, his badge glinting in the morning sun. The man dismounted with practiced ease, his weathered face breaking into the same friendly smile Eli had seen 100 times before. "Morning, Eli," Watson called out, tipping his hat. "Hope you don't mind the early visit. Got some business to discuss." The sheriff's eyes found Ayanna, and something flickered across his features. Not surprise, but recognition. The kind that comes with previous acquaintance. "Ayanna," Watson said quietly. "Been wondering where you'd ended up." She took an involuntary step backward, her hand moving instinctively to cover the brand on her arm. Eli watched this exchange with growing dread. The sheriff knew her, had known where she was all along, which meant this visit wasn't coincidental. "What kind of business, Sheriff?" Eli asked, though he already feared the answer. Watson's smile never wavered, but his eyes had gone cold as winter stone. "The kind that involves property that ain't been properly registered, Eli. The kind that needs to be sorted out before it becomes a legal problem." The sheriff's hand rested casually on his gun belt, and Eli realized with crystal clarity that everything he believed about law and order in his town was a lie. Eli felt the weight of Watson's stare like a physical thing. The sheriff's casual mention of property made his stomach turn, but anger was beginning to burn through the shock. This man, someone he'd respected, someone he'd voted for, was standing on his land, talking about Ayanna like she was livestock. "What exactly are you suggesting, Sheriff?" Eli kept his voice steady, though his hands trembled with rage. Watson stepped closer, his boots crunching on the broken coffee mug fragments. "I'm suggesting that certain arrangements need proper documentation, Eli. Mrs. Winters was supposed to handle the paperwork when she transferred the girl, but seems she forgot to file it with the county." "Paperwork for what?" "Ownership transfer." Watson said it like he was discussing cattle or horses. "See, legally speaking, Ayanna here is still listed as property of the Carver estate. When old man Carver died, everything went to probate. That includes her." Ayanna had gone rigid, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts. Eli noticed how she positioned herself behind the pump, putting the stone structure between her and the sheriff. "Since when do people own other people in this territory?" Eli demanded. Watson laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Since always, friend. We just call it something prettier now. Apprenticeship contracts, indentured servitude, debt collection. Laws are on our side, as long as the paperwork's in order. And if someone refuses to honor these contracts, well, that would be theft of valuable property. Serious crime." Watson's hand moved closer to his gun. "Could mean jail time. Could mean worse if the property in question tries to run." Eli glanced at Ayanna, seeing the terror she was trying so hard to hide. How many others had she watched dragged back to those pens behind Peterson's store? How many had tried to resist only to disappear entirely? "What do you want, Watson?" "Simple. You got two choices. First choice, you pay the estate's debt on her contract. That would be about $250 plus interest, plus the cost of housing and feeding her this past year and a half. $250. More money than Eli saw in 6 months of ranching. Money he didn't have and couldn't borrow. Not without selling his land. What's the second choice?" Watson's smile returned, cold and predatory. "You let us take her back to town. She'll be put up for auction again next week. Legal and proper this time. Might even get a better price, seeing as she's been well fed and cared for under your roof." "No." The word came out before Eli could stop it. The sheriff's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. That's not really your decision to make, Eli. She ain't yours to keep. She's not anyone's to keep. She's a person. She's property that ain't been paid for. And property has to be returned to its rightful owners. Watson stepped around the pump, moving toward Ayanna. Come on, girl. Time to go. Ayanna pressed herself against the stone, her eyes darting between Eli and the sheriff. For a moment, Eli saw past her careful control to the absolute terror beneath. This woman, who'd faced whatever horrors led to that brand on her arm, who'd survived being sold like cattle, was more afraid of going back than she'd been of anything else. She stays, Eli said, moving to block Watson's path. The sheriff's hand settled on his gun handle. Step aside, Eli. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Or what? You'll shoot me on my own land. If that's what it takes to uphold the law. Watson's voice had gone flat, emotionless. You're harboring stolen property. That's a crime I can't ignore. But Eli had stopped listening because behind Watson, he could see dust clouds on the horizon, more riders approaching, and he realized with growing horror that the sheriff hadn't come alone. The approaching riders resolved into familiar shapes that made Eli's heart sink. Peterson from the trading post, his massive frame unmistakable even at a distance. Banker Caldwell on his pristine black horse. 3 other men Eli recognized from town council meetings, all armed, all wearing the same grim expressions. You called for backup? Eli asked Watson, though the answer was obvious. Called for witnesses, the sheriff corrected. Legal requirement when recovering valuable property. These gentlemen represent the interests of the community. As the riders drew closer, Eli caught sight of something that made his blood freeze. Peterson's horse pulled a small cart, and in that cart were chains, heavy iron shackles that gleamed dully in the morning sun. Ayanna saw them too. Her controlled facade finally cracked, and a sound escaped her throat, not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, but something raw and broken that cut through Eli like a blade. Please, she whispered, the first time he'd heard her voice shake. Don't let them take me back. The words hit Eli harder than any physical blow. This strong, dignified woman, who'd endured unspeakable horrors, was begging him for protection he couldn't give. $250 might as well have been $2,500. His ranch barely produced enough to keep him fed and clothed. Peterson dismounted with a grunt, his belly straining against his vest. Morning, Eli. Sorry about this, but business is business. What business? Eli's voice came out rougher than he intended. The auction business. We got buyers coming in from 2 territories next week. Mexican silver miners looking for domestic help. They pay top dollar for trained workers. Peterson gestured toward Ayanna like she was a horse he was evaluating. She'll fetch a good price, especially with that pretty face. She's not for sale. Caldwell, the banker, urged his horse closer. Actually, she is. Legal documents show clear ownership transfer from the Carver estate to whoever pays the outstanding debt. You pay, you own her. You don't pay, she goes to auction. I don't have the money. Then you don't have a choice. Caldwell's voice held no sympathy. Sheriff Watson has a legal obligation to recover stolen property. Eli looked around at these men he'd known for years. Peterson, who'd sold him supplies and asked about his health. Caldwell, who'd helped him through lean seasons with flexible payment terms. Men he'd shared drinks with, who'd invited him to town celebrations, who'd seemed like decent human beings. How long have you all been doing this? He asked. 8 years, Peterson said proudly. Ever since the territorial government started looking the other way. good business, long as you keep it quiet and handle the paperwork properly. Good business, Eli repeated, tasting bile. Selling people like cattle. Selling labor contracts, Watson corrected. Perfectly legal indentured servitude. These people owe debts to society, to their families, to circumstances beyond their control. We provide them with work and housing in exchange for their service. What debt does she owe? Eli nodded toward Ayanna. The men exchanged glances. Finally, Peterson spoke. Her people raided a settlement 2 years back. Stole horses, burned buildings. She was captured during the Army's retaliation. I wasn't there, Ayanna said quietly. I was gathering medicine plants with my grandmother. 3 days' ride from any settlement. Doesn't matter, Watson said. Apache is Apache. Her people's debt becomes her debt. The casual cruelty of it staggered Eli. Guilty by association with crimes she'd never committed. Sold to pay for raids she'd never participated in. Branded like livestock and passed from owner to owner based on paperwork and prejudice. Time's up, Eli, Watson said, drawing his gun. Step aside, or I'll move you aside. But as the sheriff raised his weapon, Ayanna stepped forward. The terror was still in her eyes, but alongside it was something else. Resignation, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion from carrying this burden alone for so long. Wait, she said, and her voice carried across the ranch with unexpected strength. Before you take me back, Mr. Thompson deserves to know the whole truth. She turned to face Eli directly, and when their eyes met, he saw depths of pain he hadn't imagined possible. You asked about my mark, she said. You thought it was decoration. Ayanna rolled up her sleeve completely, exposing the full mark on her arm. In the harsh morning light, every detail became clear. The rough burned edges, the deliberate scarring, the small numbers etched below the main symbol. But it was what she said next that shattered something fundamental inside Eli's chest. It's not a tattoo, she said, her voice carrying across the silent ranch. It's a brand from the auction. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Eli stared at the mark, really looked at it for the first time. The circle he'd thought was decorative was actually the letter C, for Carver. The symbols inside weren't tribal designs, but property markers indicating ownership and value. The numbers below weren't ceremonial, but inventory codes, marking her as item number 23 in some ledger of human misery. They heat the iron until it glows white, Ayanna continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Then they press it into your skin while 4 men hold you down. The smell of your own flesh burning stays with you forever. Eli felt his knees buckle. The full horror of what she'd endured, what these respectable townspeople had done to her, crashed over him like a collapsing wall. She'd been branded like cattle, like property, by people he'd called neighbors. The numbers tell them how much you sold for, she went on relentlessly. 23 means $23. That's what I was worth to them. Less than a decent horse. A sound escaped Eli's throat, something between a sob and a growl. Tears he hadn't felt coming burned hot tracks down his cheeks. The woman standing before him had been reduced to $23 and a burn scar. And he'd been living in blissful ignorance, while monsters called themselves lawmen. Jesus Christ, Peterson muttered, shifting uncomfortably. She ain't supposed to talk about that part. Shut up, Eli snarled, his voice breaking. The banker and sheriff exchanged nervous glances as they watched this man they'd known for years fall apart before their eyes. The worst part, Ayanna said, looking directly at Eli, isn't the pain. It's knowing that everyone who sees this mark will know exactly what you are, what was done to you, what you're worth. Eli wiped his eyes with shaking hands, but the tears kept coming. Every time he'd seen her cover that mark, every time she'd flinched from his gaze, every moment of shame she'd carried, it all made sense now. She wasn't hiding decoration. She was hiding proof of her dehumanization. "That's enough," Watson snapped, clearly uncomfortable with how this revelation was affecting Eli. "Time to go, girl." But Eli stepped forward, placing himself squarely between the sheriff and Ayanna. When he spoke, his voice carried a rage so pure and cold it made the armed men take an involuntary step back. "No," he said. "You're not taking her anywhere." "Eli, be reasonable," Caldwell started. "Reasonable." Eli's laugh was harsh as breaking glass. "You burned a number into a human being's skin, and you want me to be reasonable?" Watson raised his gun. "Last warning, Eli. Step aside or face the consequences." Eli looked at the weapon pointed at his chest, then at the chains in Peterson's cart, then at Ayanna's face, proud despite everything, terrified despite her courage. "I'll pay the debt," he said quietly. "You don't have the money," Caldwell pointed out. Eli's smile was terrible to see. "No, but I know where to get it." The men watched Eli with growing unease as he walked toward his house. His tears had stopped, replaced by something far more dangerous: calm purpose. When he emerged from the cabin, he carried a leather satchel and a piece of paper that made Caldwell's face go white. "What's that?" Watson demanded. "A loan document," Eli said, unfolding the paper. "Signed by every man standing here. Caldwell, you loaned me $75 last spring for seed money. Peterson, you extended credit for supplies. Watson, you vouched for my character to the Territorial Bank." "So," Peterson blustered, though his confidence was clearly shaking, "so all of you have been operating an illegal slave trade on territorial land that violates federal jurisdiction." Eli pulled a badge from a satchel, not the local sheriff's tin star that Watson wore, but a different badge entirely. One that made all 5 men step backward. "U.S. Marshal Eli Thompson," he said quietly. "I've been investigating reports of human trafficking in this territory for 8 months." The silence that followed was deafening. Watson's gun hand trembled as the implication sank in. A federal marshal had been living among them, documenting their crimes, gathering evidence. "That's impossible," Caldwell whispered. "You're just a rancher." "I am a rancher. I'm also a federal officer working undercover." Eli's voice carried the weight of absolute authority now. Every transaction, every auction, every forged document, it's all been recorded and reported to the territorial governor. Peterson dropped the chains from his cart with a clatter. "Now hold on, Marshal. We can work something out." The only thing being worked out is Ayanna's immediate freedom and the arrest of everyone involved in this operation. Eli turned to Watson. "Drop your weapon, Sheriff. You're under federal arrest for human trafficking, conspiracy, and violation of territorial law." Watson's face had gone gray, but his gun remained pointed at Eli. "You can't prove anything. Word against word." "Actually, I can." Eli reached into the satchel again and pulled out a small journal. Names, dates, amounts paid, inventory numbers, everything. He opened to a random page and read aloud. "March 12th, Apache woman, approximately 24 years old. Sold to William Carver for $23. Branded with ownership mark. Witnesses present: Sheriff James Watson, banker Robert Caldwell, store owner Frank Peterson." The journal entry matched Ayanna's story perfectly, down to the $23 price and the branding. Watson's gun hand wavered as he realized his own signature was probably on dozens of similar documents. 8 months of evidence, Eli continued. Bills of sale, witness testimonies, financial records showing where the money went. The Territorial Army is already moving to shut down operations in 4 other towns running similar schemes. Caldwell made a strangled sound. We'll lose everything. Our businesses, our homes. You should have thought of that before you started selling human beings. Eli's voice held no sympathy. Ayanna, step away from them. But as she moved toward Eli, Watson made a desperate decision. With nothing left to lose, he swung his gun toward the woman who'd exposed their entire operation. If we're going down, he snarled, she's coming with us. The crack of Watson's gunshot split the morning air. But Eli had been expecting it. 8 months of watching these men had taught him to read their desperation. He'd thrown himself sideways the instant Watson's finger began to tighten, tackling Ayanna to the ground behind the stone pump. The bullet struck the pump's rim, sending chips of rock flying. Before Watson could fire again, the thunder of approaching hooves announced the arrival of federal reinforcements. 7 riders in blue uniforms crested the hill, their rifles already drawn. Federal marshals, the lead rider shouted. Drop your weapons. Watson's face crumpled as he realized the trap had been perfectly set. Eli hadn't been working alone. The entire operation had been coordinated from the territorial capital. The sheriff's gun clattered to the ground as he raised his shaking hands. Peterson, Caldwell, the rest of you, on your knees, Eli commanded, standing and helping Ayanna to her feet. The men who'd seemed so confident minutes earlier now looked like what they truly were, criminals caught in the act. Deputy Marshal Sarah Chun dismounted and approached Eli with professional efficiency. Marshal Thompson, status report. 5 suspects in custody. Evidence secured. Eli handed her the journal and documents. The woman here is Ayanna. She's a key witness and victim. The brand on her arm is evidence of their branding practices. Chen's jaw tightened as she examined the mark. We'll need photographs for the trial. Ma'am, are you willing to testify? Ayanna looked at the men kneeling in the dirt, their hands bound with iron shackles, the same chains they'd brought to bind her. Yes, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. I'll testify. What about the auction operation? Eli asked. Shut down as of this morning, Chin replied. We hit 4 locations simultaneously. 53 people freed, including 15 children. The territorial governor has issued warrants for every participant we can identify. Peterson made a whimpering sound. Our families will starve. Our businesses. You should have thought of that before you started trafficking human beings, Chin said coldly. Load them in the wagon. As the deputies secured the prisoners, Eli turned to Ayanna. She was staring at Watson as he was dragged away, her expression unreadable. How do you feel? Eli asked quietly. Free, she said simply. For the first time in 2 years, truly free. What will you do now? Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, watching the dust settle as the wagon carrying her tormentors disappeared down the road. I don't know, she admitted. For so long, I've only thought about surviving each day. I never dared plan for a future. Eli nodded toward his ranch house, where smoke still rose from the morning fire. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, as a free woman, with wages and respect. And when your martial work is finished, Eli looked around at the land he'd grown to love, the place where he'd uncovered such darkness, but also found a purpose larger than himself. Maybe it doesn't have to be finished. There are other territories, other operations like this one, other people who need help. Ayanna smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Then, maybe I'll help you help them. For months later, Eli stood in the territorial courthouse, watching Judge Harrison deliver the final sentences. Watson received 25 years in federal prison. Caldwell and Peterson got 18 each. The other men received varying terms, but all would spend significant time behind bars for their crimes against humanity. Ayanna sat in the witness section, her testimony having been crucial in securing the convictions. The scar on her arm would never disappear, but she wore it openly now, not as a mark of shame, but as proof of her survival and strength. The court finds the defendants guilty of human trafficking, conspiracy, and violation of federal law, Judge Harrison announced. Furthermore, all assets derived from this illegal operation will be seized and used to provide reparations to the victims. Outside the courthouse, Deputy Marshal Chun approached them with official papers. Ayanna, this makes it official. You're a free citizen with full legal rights. Your service as a witness in this case has also earned you a federal commendation. What does that mean? Ayanna asked. It means you're a hero, Chun replied. Your courage in testifying helped us shut down similar operations across 4 territories. 53 people are free because you spoke up. 53 people. The same number that had been branded into her arm, now representing lives saved rather than dollars paid. Marshal Thompson, Chun continued, your next assignment came through from Washington. Reports of trafficking operations near the Colorado border. You interested? Eli looked at Ayanna, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Only if my partner can come with me. Partner. Ayanna knows these operations better than any federal agent. She can spot the signs, identify the victims, understand their fear. I want her officially appointed as a special consultant. Chun smiled. I'll make the recommendation. The territorial government is very interested in preventing future operations. As they walked away from the courthouse, Ayanna paused at the steps. Do you ever regret it? Giving up your quiet ranch life? Eli considered the question seriously. I thought I was living peacefully, but I was just living in ignorance. Real peace comes from knowing you're doing something that matters. And the ranch? Still there, still mine, but now it serves a different purpose. Eli adjusted his marshal's badge, the weight of it familiar now. Now we have a place to bring victims while they recover. A safe place where they can remember what freedom feels like. They mounted their horses and headed west toward Colorado, and whatever operations might be waiting there. Behind them, the town that had once hosted monthly slave auctions was learning to function without its darkest secret. New businesses were opening, run by people who understood that prosperity built on suffering was no prosperity at all. As they rode, Ayanna rolled up her sleeve to let the sun hit the scar on her arm. The brand would always be there, but its meaning had changed completely. Once a mark of ownership, it was now a symbol of justice served and wrongs righted. What do you think we'll find in Colorado? She asked. People who need help, Eli replied. People who deserve justice. And we'll give it to them. Eli touched his badge, then looked at the woman riding beside him, no longer a victim, but a partner in the fight for justice. Every time they rode toward the horizon, 2 souls transformed by truth and united in purpose, carrying hope to those who had forgotten it existed. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where justice and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.